Be quiet, ma'am. Captain Richard Mallory cut Maya William off just as she began to offer her point. I am the one telling this room how justice works. Maya only smiled. I'm simply asking about the constitutional limits of proactive law enforcement, she said. Specifically, whether the data you cited accounts for civilian complaints and traffic stops, later found to lack probable cause. Excuse me, girl. Oh, this moment is not for you. Captain Mallory brutally cut through Maya's sentence again. What department are you with? Looking like that. You must have wandered into the wrong room. Maybe you should find the buffet table out in the hall, or the check-in area, and help the organizers carry water. That would suit you better. A few people laughed. Maya waited until the mocking laughter in the room had faded completely. Then she spoke again, steady and slow. Captain Mallory, I am in the right room, she said, and the issue I am raising is the legality of lowering suspect identification standards in the procedure your unit is using in the report that claims a 15% increase in arrests. If you do not follow the Constitution while enforcing the law, then you are not protecting justice. You are standing outside it. Captain Mallory leaned back in his chair at the round table and gave the room a tired smile. Ma'am, he said, drawing the word out. I've spent 25 years wearing a badge. I've stood on streets at 2 in the morning that most people in this room would not drive through with their doors unlocked. I know what works. Several heads nodded. One retired sheriff near the front folded his arms and muttered, That's right. Maya remained standing. I'm not questioning your years of service, Captain. I'm asking whether enforcement numbers without civil rights data give this conference a complete picture. Mallory's jaw tightened. There it is, he said, turning slightly toward the panel moderator. This is exactly what happens. We come here to have a serious discussion about public safety, and someone tries to turn it into an accusation. I made no accusation, Maya said. I asked a question. A nervous man. Perhaps we can return to the prepared topic. But Mallory was not finished. No, let me answer her, he said. Then he looked straight at Maya. You don't need to teach me how to do my job. Not from the middle of an aisle. Not with a notebook. Not after hearing 10 minutes of a presentation and deciding you understand the streets better than the people who work them. He jabbed one finger straight at the shining badge pinned to his chest, his voice heavy with condescension and command. You do not need, and you are absolutely not qualified, to teach me how to do my job. In here, we talk with blood, with guns, and with real-life experience. Not with theoretical sentences from people who sit in air-conditioned rooms. Sit down and learn, or walk out. Maya gave a small nod. She lowered her eyes, opened the small notebook in her hand, and calmly wrote with her ballpoint pen. Captain Mallory, narrow perspective. Refuses constitutional dialogue. Serious signs of abusive thinking in law enforcement practice. Then Maya lifted her head. If this is a discussion, she said, her voice still even, then I believe I have the right to offer an opinion. And frankly, Captain, your view is deeply one-sided. Mallory's face hardened. Who the hell are you to speak up in here? He snapped. A person like you should be grateful you're even standing in this room, not acting like you belong at the table. Mallory's eyes swept over Maya with open contempt. What's your name? He demanded. You don't even have a badge. Or are you just a janitor, pretending to cause a scene? Maya did not flinch. My name is Maya William, sir, she said. And I assure you, I am standing exactly where I am supposed to stand. Maya William, he repeated, as if tasting something unpleasant. Well, Miss William, if you don't disappear, then after this little event is over, you are going to pay dearly for your behavior. Maya looked at him for a long second. She had learned that anger was not always the strongest answer. So she nodded once, closed her notebook, and turned and walked toward the ballroom doors. Behind her, the whispers began before she reached the aisle. Who does she think she is? Can you believe that? No badge, no title, and she wants to lecture a captain? She probably came in with one of those activist groups. Ridiculous. She did not turn around. Her hand still held the notebook. Maya opened it again and added one more note beneath the others. Threat issued in public. Witnesses present. She had barely finished writing when a quiet voice came from her left. Maya. She looked up, Judge Harold Whitman stood near the hallway window. He knew exactly who Maya William was. Whitman stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Maya, you should let the organizers introduce your identity right now," he said. "He is not going to stop. Don't let that man continue humiliating you," she whispered back, her voice flat and calm. "Let him continue, Judge Whitman. I want to see how this room treats a black woman when they believe she has no power in her hands." "Welcome to the Jefferson Legal Leadership Conference." A host's voice rang through the speaker system. "This morning's opening session will focus on public safety, constitutional rights, and the future of justice." Maya paused near the entrance to the grand ballroom. A man in a gray suit walked past her with a cup of coffee in his hand. He nodded to someone ahead of him. "Good morning, Judge." A silver-haired woman answered with a polite smile. "Good morning, Counsel. It's good to see you again." Across the hall, a group of older men stood around the coffee table. "Captain, excellent remarks upstairs," one of them said. The man they called Captain was Mallory. He let out a low laugh. "Well, somebody has to say the things politicians are afraid to say." Maya heard it, but she did not turn around. She looked at Harold Whitman and said, "The ceremony has started." "I'll go in first, sir." Harold Whitman nodded. Maya stepped back into the conference hall. A young conference staffer approached her. "Ma'am, may I help you find your seat?" Maya looked at the young woman and gave her a soft smile. "Thank you. I think I can find it." She found a seat near the middle of the room. Over the speakers, the host's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our opening keynote will begin shortly." The conversations slowly faded. The older men in the front rows adjusted their jackets, straightened their backs, and prepared to listen. Maya placed the notebook on her lap, her hand resting lightly on its worn cover. On stage, Captain Richard Mallory stood straight behind the podium. His face carried the proud expression of a man who believed every word of his own legend. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mallory said, his voice low and resonant, "this city does not lack compassion. What it lacks is discipline. And when discipline disappears from the streets, crime walks in." A few older men in the front row nodded. Someone gave a light clap. Mallory smiled. "Over the past 3 years, my unit has moved into the hottest zones in this city," he continued. "Places many people would not drive through after sunset. We have taken back neighborhoods one block at a time, one corner at a time, one building at a time." The moderator beside him nodded with visible respect. "Captain Mallory, could you tell us more about that operation?" "Of course," Mallory replied. "We call it bringing order back. Not with promises, not with emotional speeches, but with presence, accountability, and hard action." Maya Williams sat below the stage, both hands resting calmly on the notebook in her lap. She did not clap. She only listened. Mallory swept his gaze across the room. "I know there are people who like to talk about reform. They like to use beautiful words in air-conditioned rooms. But out there, on the street, our officers do not have time to write moral essays. They have seconds to make decisions." A man in a gray suit near the front chuckled approvingly. "That's right." Maya lifted her chin slightly. The moderator asked, "So, in your view, Captain, what is the most important element of community safety?" Mallory placed both hands on the edge of the podium. "Order. Without order, there is no justice. Without discipline, there is no safety. And if we allow every complaint against police officers to become a witch hunt, the only people who benefit are criminals." This time, the applause was louder. Maya remained silent. The woman sitting beside her leaned closer and whispered, "He sounds very convincing, doesn't he?" Maya kept her eyes on the stage. "He speaks very smoothly." The woman paused. "What do you mean?" "I'm waiting to see whether he mentions the rest." "The rest?" Maya lowered her voice. "The 11 civilian complaints still waiting for review. The delayed release of body camera footage. The traffic stops in black neighborhoods that far exceed population ratios. The mothers calling the city office every week, asking why their sons' cases have not moved forward." The woman beside her went quiet. On stage, Mallory continued, "Some people will sit in conferences like this and ask why we make so many stops," he said, his tone sharpening. "I ask them this: what do you want us to do? Wait until shots are fired before we act. A man in the front row called out. Never. Mallory pointed toward him. Exactly. Police officers are not paid to please everybody. We are tasked with protecting the city. Maya opened her notebook and wrote a few words slowly, clearly. The woman beside her glanced down. Are you a reporter? No, Maya said. A lawyer? Maya closed her pen. Not exactly. Mallory's eyes moved over the audience and stopped for 1 second when he saw Maya was not applauding. His smile thinned. Of course, he said, his voice lighter now but sharp enough to cut through the air. There are always people who prefer to sit quietly out there and judge the men and women who actually do the work. Several eyes turned toward Maya. Maya sat straight. The moderator gave a quick, nervous laugh. Captain, you're speaking about the difference between theory and reality, correct? That's exactly right, Mallory said. The reality is that criminals do not care about our feelings. The reality is that the streets need people with courage, not people who ask questions after everything is already over. Maya slowly raised her hand. Mallory saw her. He deliberately turned the other way. The moderator saw her too. It appears we have a question from the middle section. Mallory let out a short laugh. I think we should leave questions until later. I'm not finished. Maya lowered her hand. Mallory went on. As I was saying, my unit has arrested hundreds of dangerous individuals. We seized weapons, shut down drug corners, and removed people from the streets who ordinary citizens were afraid to confront. Maya raised her hand again. This time the moderator looked uncomfortable. Captain Mallory, perhaps we can take one brief question. Mallory looked directly at Maya. Ma'am, I'm sure your question is very important to you, but I'm presenting real-world experience here. Maya answered from her seat, calm and clear. Then I would like to ask about the part of that real-world experience you haven't mentioned. Mallory tilted his head. Excuse me? Maya stood. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. You spoke about accountability. Why have you not mentioned the 11 civilian complaints still awaiting review? A wave of whispers moved through the room. Mallory placed one hand on the podium. His smile disappeared. Ma'am, you are quoting incomplete information. Then you can complete it, Maya said. You also have not mentioned the delayed release of body camera footage in several incidents. Mallory cut in immediately. That is a procedural matter. Maya looked at him. Procedure should not become a curtain for the truth. A few people turned fully in their seats to look at her. Mallory lowered his voice. You should be careful with accusations like that. I have made no accusation, Maya said. I am asking a question. No, Mallory said, the cold smile returning. You are trying to turn a public safety conference into a courtroom. Maya held his gaze. No, Captain. I am trying to remind you that safety does not belong only to the people holding badges. It also belongs to the people made afraid by those badges. Mallory stood still for several seconds, then gave a dry laugh. Ma'am, I have served in this force for nearly 30 years. I have faced guns, gangs, and streets you have probably only read about in reports. So with all due respect, I do not need a moral lecture from the audience. Maya tilted her head slightly. I understand. You like telling this room who you caught. I want to know who you ignored. The murmuring grew wider. The moderator stepped forward. Perhaps we should move into the break. Mallory seized the opportunity. Good idea. I think everyone needs coffee more than they need another baseless interrogation. Maya sat down slowly. The woman beside Maya whispered, Aren't you afraid of him? Maya watched Mallory step away from the podium, where several people immediately surrounded him and shook his hand, as if he were a hero. I've met men like him before, Maya said quietly. Criminals do not always hide in the dark. Sometimes they wear clean uniforms, stand under bright lights, and get applause from the whole room. If you feel the weight of Maya's words, please hit the like button and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because maybe someone near you is watching this story too. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. The woman had no answer. After a moment, Maya rose and walked toward him without hurry. When Maya came near him, she stopped. She politely extended her right hand, her eyes direct as she looked at the veteran police officer. Thank you for sharing your real-world experience during the discussion, Captain Mallory. Mallory stopped. He made no move to raise his hand. Instead, he slipped both hands into his pants pockets and lifted his chin slightly. I think you should be grateful the organizers were loose enough to let you slip into a high-level conference like this, he said. But remember this. Don't ever stick your nose into other people's business again. He stepped closer, reducing the space between them. His voice dropped, full of mockery. Tell me, what unit are you with down there? Who supervises you? I think you need to be sent back to the rear and retrained from the beginning on how to behave. Maya did not flinch. She also did not snatch her extended hand back in embarrassment. She left it there 1 second longer, long enough for the refusal to belong to him, not to her. Then she slowly withdrew it. A faint smile touched her lips. I supervise myself, Captain, she said, and training is indeed necessary, for both me and you. Mallory gave a cold snort. He turned his back and walked away, dismissing her sentence before it had finished living in the air. Maya watched him go. Then she turned to the woman who had been sitting beside her, gave a polite nod of farewell, and began walking at an unhurried pace toward the passage leading backstage. The anonymous test was over. Maya walked toward the backstage passage without looking back, but she could still feel the room rearranging itself behind her. That was something power always did when it was challenged. It did not explode at first. It shifted. Men leaned closer to one another. Voices lowered. Eyes followed the person who had asked the wrong question. Smiles tightened, not because anyone had been harmed, but because someone had interrupted the comfort of agreement. The hallway behind the Jefferson ballroom curved past a service station where 2 hotel workers were replacing coffee urns and clearing used plates. The smell of roasted coffee, buttered toast, and floor polish drifted through the corridor. A young waiter balanced a tray of empty cups against his hip and gave Maya a quick, respectful nod as she passed. "Ma'am," he said softly. Maya returned the nod. "Thank you." It was a small exchange, barely anything at all, but it settled in her chest differently from the applause Mallory had received. The waiter did not know who she was. He did not know what title would be placed before her name that evening. He had simply seen another human being walking past him and offered basic dignity. Sometimes, Maya thought, civilization survived in gestures so small that powerful people never noticed them. Ahead, a sign on a brass stand pointed toward the green room, speaker check-in, and staff access. Maya slowed near the turn but did not enter yet. She could hear Mallory's voice behind her, louder than the others, coming from the open ballroom doors. "Look, I respect questions," Mallory was saying, "but there is a difference between a question and a performance." A few men murmured agreement. Maya stopped beside a tall arrangement of white lilies and listened. "She came in looking for attention," one officer said. "Exactly," Mallory replied. "That's how it starts. They throw out numbers they don't understand, then accuse the police of oppression when we explain reality." Another voice, older and amused, said, "You handled it better than I would have." Mallory laughed. "I've had worse than that on the street. Believe me." Maya opened her notebook and wrote without leaning against the wall, her posture still straight. "Public framing. Portrays constitutional questions as performance." She capped her pen. A woman's voice spoke from behind her. "You write fast." Maya turned. A young woman stood a few feet away, with a press badge hanging from a blue lanyard. She looked to be in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, with dark blonde hair pulled into a low ponytail and a phone in one hand. Her blazer was inexpensive but neat, and her eyes carried the alert exhaustion of someone who drank too much coffee because sleep had become optional. "I try to write before people improve what they meant," Maya said. The woman gave a short laugh, surprised and appreciative. "That's a good line." "It's not a line. It's a habit." The woman glanced back toward the ballroom. "Emily Ross, Legal Affairs Daily. Maya William." Emily's eyes searched her face. "Just Maya William?" For now, that answer landed between them. Emily looked toward the ballroom again, then lowered her voice. "You asked about the 11 complaints." "I did. Most people in that room either don't know about them or pretend not to." "Which group are you in?" Emily smiled faintly. "The annoying group. The one still asking." Maya studied her. There was no arrogance in the young reporter's face, but there was fear beneath the professionalism. Not fear of conversation, fear of consequences. Maya had seen that look in witnesses before. People holding a truth too heavy for their own hands. "You've been following Mallory," Maya said. "For 8 months," Emily replied. "Off the record? Mostly. Families talk. Former officers talk. Then panic and stop answering calls. City officials say they'll look into it, then send me statements that read like they were written by the same lawyer who taught wallpaper how to speak." Maya almost smiled. Emily stepped closer. "The body camera delays are real. The complaints are real. But the paper trail keeps breaking. Every time I get close, something is classified as internal review, personnel matter, active investigation, or some other phrase that means, go away. And you think Mallory is involved? I think he is more than involved." Emily looked toward the ballroom doors again. "But thinking is not printing." "No," Maya said. "It is not." For a moment, neither woman spoke. Inside the ballroom, the break was ending slowly. Cups were being tossed into bins. Chairs scraped against the carpet. The host's voice came over the speaker system, asking attendees to begin returning to their seats for the next panel. Emily looked at Maya's notebook. "You're not press. You're not staff. You're not with one of the advocacy groups, are you?" Maya did not answer directly. Emily nodded as if she had expected that. "Whoever you are, be careful with him. With Mallory. With Mallory. With the people around Mallory, and with the people who pretend they're neutral because neutrality keeps their invitations coming." Emily's mouth tightened. "He has friends in City Hall, friends in the prosecutor's office, friends in unions, foundations, churches, veteran groups. He's very good at making himself look like the last honest man in a room full of cowards." Maya glanced toward the ballroom, where Mallory was accepting another handshake. "That kind of man usually needs a room full of cowards to survive," she said. Emily's expression changed, just slightly. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut across the hall. "Price." Maya and Emily both turned. A young officer in uniform stood near the side entrance, holding a folder against his chest. He was tall, clean-shaven, and stiff in the way new officers sometimes were when they had not yet learned which rules could be bent and which ones could break a person. His eyes lifted at the sound of his name, then dropped immediately when Mallory approached him. Captain Mallory's smile was gone now. He moved close enough that no one else in the hallway would have heard him clearly if Maya had not been standing near the lilies, still and attentive. "I saw you talking to press earlier," Mallory said. The young officer swallowed. "Sir," she asked about the schedule. Mallory tilted his head. "Do I look stupid to you?" "No, sir." "Then don't answer me like I am." The officer's fingers tightened around the folder. Mallory stepped closer. His voice lowered, but every word sharpened. "You like your assignment, Price?" "Yes, sir." "You like paying your mortgage?" The young officer went pale. Mallory smiled without warmth. "Then understand something. There are people who protect the department, and there are people who embarrass it. Only one of those people has a future." Officer Daniel Price stared at the carpet. "Yes, sir," he said. Mallory patted his shoulder once, a gesture that might have looked friendly from across the hall. "Good. Now get inside." Price nodded and walked toward the ballroom. Emily had stopped breathing for a moment. Maya noticed. "That's him," Emily whispered. "Daniel Price." Emily looked at her quickly. "You know his name?" "You just told me enough." Emily's face tightened. "He knows where the reports changed. I think he saw the drafts before and after review. But he won't talk. Not now." Maya watched Daniel disappear through the ballroom doors. She saw the set of his shoulders, the shame in the back of his neck, the way fear made him walk faster than dignity wanted him to. "He may not be ready," Maya said, "but he is listening to himself now." Emily looked at her with uncertainty. "What does that mean?" "It means a person can obey a lie for a long time, but the first time he hears himself say yes to it, something begins to break." The host's voice came again. "Ladies and gentlemen, our afternoon panel will begin in 2 minutes." Emily slipped her phone into her pocket. "Are you going back in?" Maya looked toward the ballroom. Captain Mallory had already returned to the front section. Men made space for him as he passed. Helen Ward, the conference director, was near the stage, smiling too brightly as she checked the program card in her hand. She looked toward Maya once, then away, as if pretending not to see her might keep the morning intact. "Yes," Maya said. "I'm going back in." Emily hesitated. "Why?" Maya opened her notebook one more time and wrote 2 names. Emily Ross, Daniel Price. Then she closed it gently. "Because he has not finished showing this room who he is." She stepped through the ballroom doors, back beneath the lights, back into the rows of suits and flags and careful silence. And this time, when Maya took her seat, Emily Ross did not return to the press table right away. She stayed near the wall, phone in hand. The afternoon panel began with the kind of sentence that sounded harmless until it was placed in the wrong hands. "Public trust," Helen Ward said from the stage, "is the foundation of lawful authority." She stood behind the clear acrylic podium with a conference smile fixed carefully on her face. She was in her late 50s, polished in the way professional organizers often were. Every strand of hair controlled, every page in her folder color-coded, every emergency reduced to a schedule adjustment. The morning had unsettled her. Maya could see it in the stiffness of her shoulders and the way her eyes kept drifting toward Captain Mallory, as if making sure he still felt respected. "Today," Helen continued, "we are not here to divide law enforcement and the communities they serve. We are here to build bridges." A pleasant line. Safe. Applaudable. Several people clapped. Maya did not. She sat near the middle of the room, her notebook closed on her lap. Emily Ross stood near the side wall, pretending to check messages while keeping her phone angled low in her hand. Daniel Price had taken a seat 2 rows behind Mallory, his face still pale from the hallway exchange. Judge Harold Whitman sat closer to the aisle, his cane resting against his knee, his eyes moving between Maya and the stage, with the quiet concern of a man who had watched too many storms arrive on clear days. The next speaker was a deputy city attorney named Lawrence Bell, a man with a soft voice and a talent for saying very little in long sentences. He spoke about administrative process, internal review, community engagement, and stakeholder communication. He said complaints had to be handled responsibly. He said release of information had to be balanced against privacy, safety, and ongoing investigations. Maya listened to every word. She had heard this kind of language before. It was the language of delay, dressed as caution, the language of locked filing cabinets, the language officials used when the truth was not denied, only kept waiting long enough for the public to grow tired. When Bell finished, Helen invited the panel to discuss best practices in transparency. Captain Mallory leaned toward his microphone before anyone else could speak. "Transparency is important," he said, "but so is protecting officers from politically motivated attacks." The word attacks landed heavily. Mallory continued, "There are people who do not want accountability. They want punishment. They want officers second-guessed by individuals who have never made a split-second decision under threat. And I will always defend my people against that." Applause came from the front rows again. Maya opened her notebook. Whitman saw it. He leaned slightly toward her, as if the distance between them might carry his warning. Maya did not look at him, but she felt his concern. She had known men like Harold Whitman all her professional life, old enough to understand danger, decent enough to fear it for someone younger, and wise enough to know he could not choose her courage for her. Helen scanned the room for questions. Her gaze passed over Maya too quickly. "Anyone from the left section?" she asked. A retired police chief asked about officer morale. A county prosecutor asked about public messaging after use of force incidents. A law professor asked whether departments should publish annual discipline summaries. The answers were careful, broad, and mostly empty. Maya waited. She did not raise her hand immediately. She watched the rhythm of the room. Mallory answered friendly questions with warmth. He leaned back when others spoke. He smiled at older men. He nodded respectfully to judges. He called prosecutors counsel. He called city officials by their first names. Then Helen finally looked toward the middle section. Maya raised her hand. For a moment, Helen pretended not to see it. A woman behind Maya murmured, "She's raising her hand." Helen had no choice. "Yes," she said, with the tight brightness of a woman stepping near a live wire. "A brief question, please." A conference assistant brought the microphone. Maya stood. She felt the room remember her. Chairs stopped shifting. Conversations died before they began. Mallory turned his head slowly, his expression already bored, already offended, as if Maya's existence had become an inconvenience he was being forced to tolerate. "My question is for Captain Mallory and Mr. Bell," Maya said. "If a civilian complaint involves alleged excessive force, and the relevant body camera footage is withheld for months under the phrase, 'pending internal review,' what safeguards exist to ensure that internal review is not simply being used to prevent public scrutiny?" The question was calm, precise, impossible to honestly dismiss as emotional. Bell looked down at his papers. Mallory smiled. "There it is again," he said. Maya kept the microphone near her mouth. "It is a procedural question." "No," Mallory said. "It is a loaded question." Bell cleared his throat. "The city follows all applicable policies regarding evidence release and personnel privacy." "That was not my question," Maya said. "I asked what safeguard prevents delay from becoming concealment." A few heads turned toward Bell. Mallory cut in. "Ma'am, maybe you did not hear me earlier. We do not litigate police work from the audience." Maya looked at him. "If police work cannot survive public questioning, then perhaps the problem is not the audience." A low murmur moved through the ballroom. Helen stepped forward. "Let's keep the tone constructive." "My tone is constructive," Maya said. "The question is whether the process is." Mallory leaned toward his microphone, his patience gone. "Who exactly do you represent?" The room stilled. Maya knew what he was doing. It was an old tactic. When a question could not be answered, question the person asking it. "I represent the question I asked," she said. Mallory gave a humorless laugh. "That is not an answer. It is the only answer required." For the first time, a few people did not hide their reaction. A gray-haired woman near the aisle lifted her eyebrows. The retired prosecutor, who had earlier stayed silent, looked down at his hands. Daniel Price stared at the floor, but his jaw moved once, as though he were biting back words. Mallory saw that too. His voice hardened. "You come into a professional conference without a proper badge, interrupt multiple sessions, throw around accusations, and then refuse to say who you are. That tells me everything I need to know." Maya lowered the microphone slightly. "No, Captain. It tells me everything I need to know." The words were quiet, but they carried. Helen moved quickly. "Thank you, ma'am. We'll take another question." The assistant stepped toward Maya, hand out for the microphone. Maya gave it back without resistance and sat down. Mallory turned to the room with a smile meant to repair the moment. "This is exactly why discipline matters," he said. "Without order, even a conference becomes a scene." Some people laughed, but not as many as before. Maya noticed. So did Mallory. When the panel ended, attendees rose slowly. The afternoon light had shifted through the tall windows, turning the edges of the ballroom gold. Coffee had been replaced by pitchers of iced tea and plates of cookies. The older guests moved carefully, stretching their backs, adjusting hearing aids, checking phones, murmuring about dinner plans and traffic on I-395. Maya stayed seated until the aisle cleared. Then Judge Whitman came to her. He did not speak immediately. He lowered himself into the chair beside her, with the care of a man whose bones had begun negotiating with time. For a while, they both watched the front of the room, where Mallory was speaking with Helen Ward, in a low, intense voice. "You are making him angry," Whitman said at last. Maya looked at him. "He was angry before I stood up." "Yes," Whitman said. "But now he is embarrassed. That is not the same as harmed." "No," Whitman replied. "But men like him often confuse the two." Maya closed her notebook. Whitman's face softened. "Maya, I know what you are doing. I understand it better than you may think. But there is a difference between observing a man's character and letting him build a weapon out of his pride." "He has already built one," Maya said. "I'm trying to see who lets him aim it." Whitman looked toward Helen, who was nodding too quickly at something Mallory was saying. That room has disappointed you, he said. No, Maya answered. It has informed me, the old judge sighed. Your announcement is in less than an hour. I can move it forward. One word from me, and Helen will put you on that stage now. Maya shook her head. Not yet. Maya, she turned to him fully. I respect you, Judge Whitman. You know that. But if they only listen because someone puts honorable in front of my name, then they are not listening to justice. They are listening to hierarchy. Whitman's eyes held hers. And if he goes further, then he goes further in front of witnesses. That is a hard road. Maya looked down at the notebook her mother had given her. So was the road that brought me here. For a moment, Whitman said nothing. Then he reached into his coat pocket and removed an old fountain pen, black with a gold clip worn dull from use. My wife gave me this when I joined the federal bench, he said. I signed my first opinion with it. I signed my last major civil rights ruling with it too. Maya looked at the pen but did not take it. Whitman turned it slowly in his hand. She used to tell me that the law is not a wall. It is a door, and judges are either opening it or standing in front of it. Maya's expression softened. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have liked you, Whitman said. Very much. Across the room, Mallory looked toward them. His eyes narrowed when he saw Whitman sitting beside Maya. Helen Ward followed his gaze. Her smile faltered. Maya noticed both of them. Whitman did too. The old judge slipped the pen back into his pocket and placed both hands on his cane. Then continue, he said quietly. But do not mistake silence for safety. Maya stood, smoothing the front of her navy suit. I never have. From the stage area, Helen Ward began walking toward them. Her conference smile restored but thinner now, stretched over worry. Maya, Whitman said under his breath. I know, she replied. Helen approached with a folder pressed to her chest and Mallory watching from behind her. Miss William, Helen said, too politely. May I speak with you for a moment? Maya glanced once at Mallory, then back at Helen. Of course, she said, and as Helen guided her toward the side hallway, Maya understood that Captain Mallory had stopped merely answering questions. Now he was trying to remove the person asking them. Helen Ward led Maya into the side hallway, with the careful speed of someone trying to solve a problem without admitting there was one. The hallway was narrower than the ballroom and quieter, lined with framed photographs of past legal conferences, judges smiling beneath flags, police chiefs shaking hands with mayors, award recipients holding plaques under soft hotel lighting. In each photo, everyone looked respectable. Everyone looked certain. Maya had learned long ago that photographs rarely captured who had been silenced before the flash went off. Helen stopped near a small table holding pitchers of ice water and lemon slices. She turned toward Maya, still clutching the folder to her chest. Miss William, she began, I want to say first that we value engagement from all participants. Maya waited. Helen smiled too quickly. These conferences are designed to encourage dialogue. That is the whole point. But we also have to maintain a certain professional environment. A professional environment. Maya repeated. Yes. And who decides when a question becomes unprofessional? Helen's smile weakened. It is not about silencing questions. Then what is it about? Helen glanced toward the ballroom doors. Through the narrow opening, Maya could see Captain Mallory near the front row, speaking to two men in suits. He was not looking at Helen, but he did not need to. His presence had already arrived before him. Helen lowered her voice. Captain Mallory is one of our keynote law enforcement speakers. He has relationships with several agencies represented here. His department has supported this conference for years. Maya nodded slowly. So, this is about sponsorship. It is about balance, Helen said, more sharply than she intended. She caught herself and softened her tone. Please understand, I am not saying your questions are invalid. I am only asking you to consider the setting. Some topics require care. Civil rights always seem to require care when the people being questioned have power. Helen looked uncomfortable. That is not fair. No, Maya said. It is not. For a moment, Helen did not seem to know whether Maya had agreed with her or corrected her. Maya opened her notebook. Helen's eyes dropped to it. Are you documenting this conversation? I document conversations that matter. This is informal. So were the threats. Helen drew in a breath. Threats? Maya looked at her. Captain Mallory told me I would pay dearly after this event if I did not disappear. He said it in front of witnesses. Helen's face changed. Not shock exactly. More like alarm at the inconvenience of something becoming specific. I'm sure he didn't mean it that way. Did you hear it? No. But then you don't know what he meant. Helen pressed the folder tighter against her chest. She was not a cruel woman. Maya could see that. Cruelty had a different temperature. Helen was afraid. Afraid of donors, of headlines, of losing control of a day she had spent months arranging. Afraid that if the mask slipped, the whole conference would be remembered not for its banners and panels, but for the truth that had walked in wearing no badge. Miss William, Helen said, I am going to ask you respectfully to refrain from further questions during Captain Mallory's sessions. Maya's pen stopped. There it is, she said quietly. Helen flushed. This is not punitive. What would you call it? A request for cooperation. Maya looked at her for a long second. Cooperation with what? With the program. No, Miss Ward. Programs do not become uncomfortable. People do. Helen looked away. Maya continued, calm but unyielding. I asked about civilian complaints. I asked about body camera delays. I asked about safeguards against concealment. Those are not disruptions. Those are the subjects printed on your banners. Helen's voice dropped. You are putting me in a difficult position. Captain Mallory put you in a difficult position. I am only making it visible. The words landed hard. Helen's lips parted, then closed again. Behind them, the ballroom doors opened wider. Two older men stepped out laughing about something unrelated, their name badges swinging against their jackets. One of them gave Helen a cheerful nod. Fine program, Helen, he said. Thank you, Judge Patterson, she replied automatically. The men walked on toward the coffee table, and for a few seconds, the old order of the conference seemed to pass between Maya and Helen like a draft. Titles respected, reputations protected, discomfort managed out of sight. Helen waited until they were gone. I don't know who you are, she said, and the sentence came out more honestly than anything she had said before. You arrived without a visible credential. You have not identified an organization. You're asking questions that may involve pending matters. From my standpoint, I have to protect this event. Maya closed her notebook. From my standpoint, she said, you are protecting a man from the consequences of answering public questions. Helen's face tightened. That is not my intention. Intentions are private. Impact is public. The older woman looked as if she had been slapped without being touched. For the first time, Maya softened her voice. Miss Ward, I believe you want this conference to represent something honorable. I believe you care about the institution. But if the only way to preserve dignity in a room is to remove the questioner instead of requiring the speaker to answer, then the room never had dignity. It only had choreography. Helen looked down at the folder in her arms. Inside that folder, Maya knew. There were schedules, speaker notes, seating charts, sponsor acknowledgments, and probably the sealed closing session page with her own name, printed where Helen had not expected to see it yet. The thought almost made Maya tired. So much human weakness came from people not reading what was already in their hands. Before Helen could respond, Judge Harold Whitman came into the hallway. He did not hurry. Men his age did not hurry unless the building was on fire, and even then dignity might ask them to reconsider. He walked with his cane in his right hand, and his left hand tucked behind his back. His face mild, but not gentle. Helen, he said. She turned quickly. Judge Whitman, I hope there is no problem. No problem at all, Helen said. I was simply speaking with Miss William about conference procedure. Whitman looked at Maya, then back at Helen. Conference procedure should never require a woman to stop asking lawful questions. Helen swallowed. Of course not. Good, Whitman said. Then I assume Miss William remains welcome in every public session for which she is registered. Helen hesitated for half a second too long. Whitman's eyes sharpened. Does she not? Of course, Helen said. She is welcome. Maya watched Helen say the words, and she could hear what they cost her. Not morally, politically. That was the tragedy of rooms like this. Doing the right thing often sounded brave only because so many people had made it risky. Whitman nodded. Excellent. Helen forced another smile. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on the next speaker. She left them in the hallway, walking fast enough that the folder nearly slipped from her arm. Maya and Whitman stood in silence until she disappeared around the corner. The old judge sighed. She will tell Mallory she tried. I know. And Mallory will take that as permission to go further. I know that too. Whitman turned to her. Still, not ready? Maya looked through the ballroom doors. Inside, attendees were returning to their seats. Mallory sat near the front, leaning toward Daniel Price, saying something Maya could not hear. Daniel's shoulders were rigid. Not yet, Maya said. Whitman studied her face. You are testing them. No, Maya replied. They are testing themselves. A faint sadness passed through the old judge's eyes. Your mother would be proud of you, he said. Maya looked down at her notebook. My mother would tell me to eat something before I take on an entire room. Whitman laughed softly, the sound dry and brief. Then for once, I agree with your mother. Maya smiled for the first time that afternoon with real warmth. From the ballroom, the host's voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session will begin shortly. Please take your seats. Whitman offered his arm. Maya did not take it because she needed help. She took it because respect freely offered should never be wasted. Together, they walked back toward the ballroom. Near the entrance, Captain Mallory turned and saw them side by side. His eyes moved from Whitman's arm to Maya's face, and something like suspicion crossed his expression. It did not last long. Pride covered it too quickly. Maya released Whitman's arm before they entered the room. Thank you, Judge. Stay steady, he said. I intend to. She stepped back inside. The room had not changed. Not visibly. Same flags. Same polished tables. Same men adjusting their jackets and preparing to speak of justice, as if justice were an object they owned. But Maya felt the current beneath it now. Emily Ross stood near the wall, phone in hand, watching. Daniel Price sat 2 rows behind Mallory, no longer looking at the floor. Helen Ward had returned to the stage, smiling again, but her fingers trembled as she adjusted the microphone, and Captain Richard Mallory leaned back in his chair, one arm stretched over the seat beside him, waiting for the next chance to remind everyone that the room belonged to him. Maya sat down, opened her notebook, and wrote one more line. They confuse order with silence. Then she looked up. The next session began. The next session was titled, Proactive Policing and the Balance Between Safety and Rights. The phrase appeared on the screen behind the panel in clean white letters against a blue background. Beneath it sat 5 speakers, a deputy prosecutor from Fairfax County, a city councilman with a flag pin on his lapel, a law professor from Georgetown, Helen Ward as moderator, and Captain Richard Mallory, who had somehow positioned himself at the center of the table, though his name was listed 4th in the program. Maya noticed that too. Men like Mallory often rearranged rooms without touching furniture. Helen tapped the microphone. Thank you all for returning. In this session, we'll discuss how law enforcement agencies can prevent crime while preserving constitutional protections and community trust. The words were correct. The room received them politely. Maya sat with her notebook open, her pen resting between 2 fingers. Judge Whitman had returned to his seat near the aisle. Emily Ross stood at the wall again, her phone down but ready. Daniel Price sat stiffly 2 rows behind Mallory, his folder closed across his knees like a shield. The law professor, Dr. Samuel Keene, began by explaining that proactive policing could be lawful when built on clear standards, documented suspicion, supervisory review, and transparent data. His tone was measured and careful. He was an older black man, maybe 60, with a gray beard and the weary patience of someone who had spent decades explaining constitutional limits to people who heard limits as insults. Safety and liberty are not enemies, Dr. Keene said. A society that sacrifices one in the name of the other eventually loses both. A few people applauded. Mallory did not. He leaned back, arms crossed, looking at the professor the way a contractor might look at an architect who had never lifted a hammer. When Helen turned to him for response, he sat forward with the eagerness of a man who had been waiting to correct the room. "With respect to Dr. Keene," Mallory began, though his voice carried very little respect. "This is where theory and reality separate. Nobody on my unit wakes up hoping to violate somebody's rights. They wake up hoping to come home alive." That line worked. It always worked. Several older attendees nodded immediately. A woman near the front touched the small gold cross at her throat. Someone murmured, "Amen," Mallory continued. "When my officers see behavior that matches criminal patterns, they act. If we force them to hesitate because someone might complain later, we are not protecting civil liberties. We are protecting criminals." Dr. Keene adjusted his glasses. "Captain, constitutional standards are not hesitation. They are the law." Mallory smiled tightly. "And I enforce the law every day." "No," Dr. Keene said calmly. "You enforce statutes. The Constitution governs how you do it." A soft murmur moved through the ballroom. Maya's pen paused above the page. For the first time that afternoon, someone on the stage had said aloud what she had been circling all day. Mallory's face did not change much, but Maya saw the small shift in his jaw. Helen saw it too and quickly moved in. "Perhaps we can discuss practical examples. Captain Mallory, your department reported a 15% increase in arrests after implementing revised suspect identification standards. Can you explain what those revised standards involve?" Maya looked up. There it was. Mallory placed both hands on the table. "The revised standards allow officers to use a wider set of observable factors when determining whether to stop and question an individual. Clothing, location, time of day, proximity to recent incidents, known associate patterns, evasive behavior." Dr. Keene's eyes narrowed slightly. "How is evasive behavior defined?" Mallory shrugged. "Depends on the circumstances." "That is a broad answer." "The street is broad, Professor." A few people chuckled. Maya wrote, "Flexible language, undefined suspicion, broad discretion." The deputy prosecutor, a woman named Marcia Bell, leaned in. "Captain, are those stops reviewed after the fact?" "Of course." "By whom?" "Supervisors." "Within your unit?" Mallory's expression cooled. "By trained personnel familiar with the realities of policing." Maya wrote again. "Internal review by same chain of command." Helen glanced toward the audience. "We have time for 2 questions before the next break." Several hands went up. Maya raised hers. Helen looked elsewhere. "Yes, Councilman?" A city councilman in the front asked whether proactive policing helped elderly residents feel safer. Mallory answered warmly, talking about grandmothers afraid to sit on their porches and store owners who wanted officers back on the corners. It was a good answer, emotionally. It painted him as protector, not enforcer. It gave the audience images they could hold. Porches, shops, grandmothers, dusk. Maya understood the power of that. People over 45 had memories tied to neighborhoods. They remembered when children played outside until streetlights came on. They remembered unlocked doors, church suppers, block captains, neighbors who knew one another by name. Mallory knew how to speak to that longing. He wrapped his policies in the language of lost safety, but longing could be manipulated. Helen looked for the next question. Maya's hand remained raised. The moderator hesitated, then pointed toward the other side of the room. "Yes, sir." A retired sheriff asked about officer recruitment. Mallory answered with ease. Maya lowered her hand. Emily Ross saw it. So did Judge Whitman. The session moved on. Dr. Keene tried to return to the question of standards, but Mallory interrupted him twice. Not loudly, not crudely, smoothly, professionally, the way men interrupt when they expect the room to call it confidence. "With respect, Professor, we can't ask officers to carry a law library in the squad car." "No one is asking that," Dr. Keene said, "but that is where this leads." "No, Captain. It leads to training." Mallory smiled. "Training is exactly what we do." Maya's pen moved again. "He turns every limit into an attack." Helen checked the clock. "We have time for one final question." Maya raised her hand before anyone else. This time, There was no way to pretend not to see her. Even some of the audience looked toward Helen, waiting to see whether she would skip the woman who had been standing all day between the conference and its comfort. Helen's smile tightened. "Miss William, please keep it brief." The assistant brought the microphone. Maya stood. She did not look at Mallory first. She looked at Dr. Keene, then Marcia Bell, then Helen, then finally the captain. "My question concerns the revised suspect identification standards," she said. "If the policy permits officers to rely on clothing, location, time of day, proximity, association, and undefined evasive behavior, what prevents those factors from becoming a substitute for individualized reasonable suspicion?" The ballroom went quiet. Dr. Keene sat back slowly, as though he had been waiting for that exact question. Mallory leaned toward his microphone. "Common sense." Maya did not blink. "Common sense is not a constitutional safeguard." A few people made soft sounds. Not quite agreement, not quite discomfort. Mallory's eyes hardened. "There are review procedures. Internal review. By the same chain of command? That is how departments function. That is how departments protect themselves," Maya said. "Not necessarily how they protect the public." Helen stepped in. "Miss William," Maya continued, still calm, "Captain, if the same unit that creates the standard, applies the standard, reviews the stop, controls the report, and delays the body camera footage, then where exactly is the independent safeguard?" Mallory stared at her. For a second, he had no ready answer. That second mattered. Then he laughed, dry and dismissive. "You have a talent for making police work sound sinister." "No," Maya said. "I have a responsibility to ask whether state power is being used lawfully." "Responsibility," Mallory repeated. "That is an interesting word." "Yes," Maya said. "It is." He leaned back. "And who gave you that responsibility?" Maya felt the room lean with him. There it was again. Not the answer, but the challenge to her right to ask. She could have ended it then. She could have given her title, watched the air leave his face, watched Helen Ward turn pale and Judge Whitman rise in relief. She could have changed the entire room with 4 words. "I am the judge." Instead, she held the microphone a little steadier. "The Constitution did," she said. A murmur passed through the room, deeper this time. Dr. Keene's eyes lowered, but Maya saw the corner of his mouth move, as if he were hiding the smallest smile. Mallory did not smile. "The Constitution," he said, "does not give private citizens the right to disrupt professional proceedings. It gives them the right to question government power," Maya replied, "especially when that power carries a weapon." The silence after that was clean and sharp. Helen rose halfway from her chair. "I think we should move on." Mallory raised a hand to stop her, the same traffic-directing gesture he had used on Maya before. "No," he said. "Let's be clear. People like this come into rooms like this with an agenda. They don't care about victims. They don't care about elderly residents afraid to go outside. They don't care about the officers who kiss their children goodbye and don't know if they'll come home. They care about making law enforcement the villain." Maya lowered the microphone slightly. "Victims also include the innocent people harmed by unlawful enforcement. Tell that to a mother whose son was shot by a gang member," Mallory snapped. "I have sat with mothers whose sons were beaten by officers," Maya said. The room froze. Mallory's mouth tightened. "You need to be careful." "I am careful," Maya said. "That is why I keep asking for records." Helen moved quickly now. "Thank you. We need to end this portion." The assistant reached for the microphone. Maya gave it back. As she sat, her pulse remained steady, but she could feel the heat in the room. Not anger exactly. Exposure. The air itself seemed aware that something hidden had been brushed by daylight. Mallory turned toward the audience with a hard smile. "This is why training matters," he said. "Some people need to learn the difference between activism and expertise." The words were aimed at Maya, but they landed elsewhere too. Daniel Price looked down at his folder. Emily Ross lifted her phone. Judge Whitman closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with the expression of a man who knew the storm had crossed the tree line. Helen announced a 15-minute break, her voice too bright. The audience rose in scattered motion. Some people avoided Maya's row. Others glanced at her with curiosity, irritation, or something closer to respect. Dr. Keene passed near her seat and paused. "You asked the right question," he said quietly. Maya looked up. "Thank you, Professor." He nodded once. Right questions make the wrong people nervous. Then, he moved on. At the front of the room, Mallory was already standing. His face was composed, but his hands were clenched at his sides before he slipped them casually into his pockets. He looked across the room at Maya, not with annoyance now, with intent. Maya opened her notebook and wrote one final line for the session. When asked for safeguards, he demanded status. Then she closed the cover and stood, knowing the next confrontation would not happen from a stage. It would happen closer, where men like Mallory felt safest. The next confrontation did not come as a shout. It came as a shadow. Maya had just stepped into the hallway outside the Jefferson ballroom when she saw Captain Richard Mallory standing near the coffee station, surrounded by 3 officers and 2 men in dark suits. He had his back half turned to her, but his eyes found her reflection in the glass of a framed conference poster. He did not move immediately. He let the room around him keep speaking for him. The uniforms, the handshakes, the older men nodding as if rank itself were proof of righteousness. Maya understood the message. He wanted her to know she was being watched. She did not stop. She walked toward the side table where pitchers of iced tea had replaced the morning coffee urns. A plate of oatmeal cookies sat untouched beside a stack of paper napkins. A woman in pearls was telling a retired judge that the traffic from McLean had been terrible. 2 prosecutors compared notes about a golf tournament. Somewhere behind Maya, someone laughed too loudly at a joke that was not funny enough to deserve it. The world had a strange way of continuing with sandwiches and small talk while something ugly gathered in the corner. Maya poured herself a glass of water. Before she could take a sip, Emily Ross appeared beside her. "You know he's not going to let this go," Emily said quietly. Maya did not look at her right away. Men like Captain Mallory rarely let go of anything. They confuse surrender with death. Emily's eyes moved toward the group near the coffee station. "He's telling people you came here to provoke him." "I heard. He's also asking who cleared your registration." Maya finally turned to her. "Is that a reporter's warning or a personal one?" "Both." Emily looked younger in the hallway light. In the ballroom, with her phone in her hand and her press badge visible, she looked like someone trained to stand near trouble. Out here, away from the tables and microphones, she looked like a woman who had spent too many months knocking on doors and being told that truth was not enough. Maya noticed the faint ink stain on Emily's thumb, the cheap flats, the way her phone screen had a small crack across the corner. Details. Always details. "You said you had been following him for 8 months, Maya said. Emily nodded. "Long enough to know the public version and the private version don't match." "What started it?" Emily glanced toward the ballroom doors, then lowered her voice. "A mother named Carla Jennings. Her son, Marcus, was stopped outside a convenience store last fall. Police said he matched a robbery suspect. He didn't. Wrong height, wrong jacket, wrong car, wrong everything. The stop turned physical. Marcus ended up with a fractured wrist and a charge for resisting arrest. Was there body camera footage? There was supposed to be." Emily's mouth tightened. "The department said the footage was under review. Then they said there was an equipment issue. Then they said the relevant segment was not available." Maya held the water glass with both hands. "And the complaint? Filed. Received. Assigned for internal review. Then nothing. How long?" 7 months. Maya's gaze sharpened. "Who signed the internal review assignment?" Emily hesitated. "That's where Daniel Price comes in," she said. Across the hall, Officer Daniel Price stood alone near a column, pretending to read the conference program. He was not reading. His eyes kept moving. First to Mallory, then to Emily, then to the ballroom doors, as if every exit had become a question. "He was in the administrative chain?" Maya asked. "Not officially in command," Emily said. "But he handled report packets, drafts, revisions, supporting documents. He saw things before they became final." "Things like what?" Emily lowered her voice even further. "Language changes. Forced to the ground became guided to the ground. Could not identify probable cause became Subject displayed evasive behavior. A witness statement disappeared from at least one file. Maybe more. Maya felt the familiar coldness settle inside her. Not surprise. Recognition. In her years as a civil rights attorney, she had seen how violence could be softened by grammar. A punch became a strike. A search became a safety check. A frightened man became non-compliant. A child became a juvenile suspect. The truth did not always vanish all at once. Sometimes it was revised until it could pass through a prosecutor's office without leaving blood on the page. Has Price confirmed this on record? Maya asked. No. Emily looked frustrated and ashamed of the frustration. He met me once in a parking lot behind a church in Alexandria. He was shaking so hard he could barely hold his coffee. He said the department was burying complaints and changing reports. Then a patrol car passed by the lot, and he left. After that, he stopped answering. Maya looked toward Daniel again. The young officer sensed it and looked away. He has a family? Maya asked. A wife, a little girl, mortgage in Woodbridge, father with medical bills. Mallory knows all of it. Of course he does. Emily studied Maya. You ask questions like someone who knows where the bodies are buried. Maya's expression did not change. No. I ask questions like someone who knows people do the burying. For a moment, Emily said nothing. Then she reached into her shoulder bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She did not hand it to Maya immediately. She held it halfway between them, trapped by caution. This is not everything, Emily said. It's just a timeline. Complaints, dates, public statements, missing footage requests. I made it for myself. Maya looked at the paper but did not take it. Do you have copies? Yes. Stored somewhere safe? Emily gave a humorless smile. 3 places. One of them with my editor. One with a friend who thinks I'm paranoid. One in the cloud under a file name so boring nobody would open it, unless they were very committed to municipal budgets. Maya took the sheet. The names were arranged in neat rows. Marcus Jennings, Althea Monroe, Devin Price, no relation to Daniel, Keisha Grant, Jerome Ellis, a list of stops, injuries, complaint numbers, delayed records, revised statements, 11 names, 11 doors knocked on, 11 families waiting. Maya read without speaking. Emily watched her face. What are you? Emily asked finally. Maya folded the paper carefully and slipped it inside her notebook. A person who believes records remember what powerful people hope everyone else forgets. That's not an answer. It is for now. From across the hallway, Mallory's voice rose. Ross. Emily stiffened. Mallory left his group and walked toward them with the slow confidence of a man approaching something he intended to step on. The officers behind him watched. So did Daniel Price. Mallory stopped a few feet away from Emily and Maya. Interesting company you're keeping, he said to Emily. Emily lifted her chin. I'm allowed to speak with conference attendees. Of course you are. And I'm allowed to wonder why a reporter with a habit of distorting police matters is whispering with someone who keeps disrupting panels. Maya said nothing. Mallory turned his eyes to her. Still here? Maya took a sip of water. Yes. Thought you might have found the exit. I found the water table. One of the officers behind Mallory smirked. Mallory's smile vanished. You think this is clever? No, Maya said. I think it is a hallway. Emily almost smiled, then stopped herself. Mallory stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to pretend this was private while making sure those nearby could still sense the threat. You should be careful who you let use you, Miss William. Reporters like Miss Ross here build stories out of half-truths and leave other people to clean up the damage. Maya looked at Emily, then back at Mallory. If the other half is in your files, Captain, perhaps you should release it. His eyes hardened. Before he could answer, Helen Ward appeared at the edge of the group, her face tight with conference panic. Captain, the next segment is about to begin, she said. We need everyone back inside. Mallory did not look away from Maya. This isn't over, he said. Maya held his gaze. No, Captain, I don't believe it is. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom, his officers following. Emily exhaled slowly. You enjoy making him angry? No, Maya said. I'm watching what he does with anger. Across the hall, Daniel Price was still standing by the column. His face had gone pale again, but this time he did not look at the floor. He looked at Maya, only for a second. Then he turned and went inside. Maya opened her notebook and wrote 2 lines beneath Emily's timeline. Reporter has names. Officer has documents. Then, after a pause, she added one more. Fear is not silence. It is testimony waiting for a safe room. The host's voice came through the speakers, calling everyone back. Emily slipped her phone into her pocket. Are you going to ask again? Maya closed the notebook. Yes. Emily looked toward the ballroom, where Mallory had already taken his seat near the front. And if they cut you off again? Maya walked toward the doors. Then we will know they heard me. Maya stepped back into the Jefferson ballroom as the afternoon light stretched across the carpet in long amber bands. The room had changed, though not in any way a hotel manager would notice. The chairs were still aligned. The banners still promised public safety, constitutional rights, and the future of justice. The water glasses still caught the light on the front tables, but the air had tightened. People who had laughed earlier now spoke more quietly when Maya passed. A few looked at her with irritation, a few with curiosity. One older woman gave her the smallest nod, then quickly looked away as if courage had surprised her and she did not want anyone to see it. Maya returned to her seat near the middle. Emily stayed near the side wall, her posture casual, but her attention sharp. Judge Whitman sat 3 rows ahead, one hand on his cane. His face turned toward the stage, but his eyes moving slightly whenever Maya moved. Daniel Price sat behind Mallory, the conference program still in his hands, though he had not turned a page in 10 minutes. Helen Ward stepped to the podium and tapped the microphone. Our next segment, she said, will focus on departmental accountability and internal review. We are fortunate to have a range of perspectives represented here today. Maya watched Captain Mallory's mouth. It tightened on the word accountability. The first speaker was Marcia Bell, the deputy prosecutor. She spoke with the tired precision of a woman used to choosing words that would not later become headlines. She said prosecutors depended on accurate police reports. She said trust between law enforcement and the public required complete documentation. She said officers who made mistakes should be corrected, and officers who committed misconduct should be held accountable. It was the right speech. It was also too gentle. Maya could hear what had been left outside the sentence. Bell did not mention race. She did not mention retaliation. She did not mention reports being changed before reaching a prosecutor's desk. She did not mention mothers waiting for phone calls that never came. She spoke of accountability as if it were a weather system, something everyone respected but nobody controlled. Then Helen turned to Mallory. Captain, how does your department ensure that internal review remains fair, especially when community concerns arise? Mallory leaned back slightly, as if the answer bored him because it was so obvious. We have procedures, he said. We have supervisors. We have trained professionals reviewing incidents. What we cannot have is every outside voice with an opinion interfering in police operations before the facts are known. Maya wrote one word: gatekeeping. Mallory continued. The public deserves transparency. Yes, but my officers deserve due process too. Lately, people seem to forget that the men and women in uniform are human beings. They have families. They carry trauma. They make split-second choices under pressure. Several heads nodded again. Maya thought of Officer Daniel Price in the hallway, his face pale while Mallory asked if he liked paying his mortgage. She thought about the way powerful men like to speak of humanity when protecting themselves, but rarely when describing the people they stopped, searched, frightened, or injured. Dr. Keene, seated beside Mallory, turned toward him. Due process for officers and transparency for the public are not opposing principles. Mallory smiled. In a classroom, maybe. In the Constitution, Dr. Keene replied. A low murmur moved through the room. This time, Mallory did not laugh. He looked toward Helen, and Helen quickly moved to the audience. We'll take a few questions, she said. Please keep them concise and respectful. Maya's hand rose. So did 3 others. Helen's eyes found Maya, then slipped away. Yes, the gentleman in the second row. The gentleman in the second row asked whether police departments needed more funding to improve reporting systems. Mallory answered warmly. Better software, better training. Better support. More resources, he said, would allow departments to be more responsive to citizens. Maya wrote. When asked about accountability, asks for resources. Another question came from an older woman who identified herself as a retired municipal judge. She asked how departments handled complaints from residents who feared retaliation. Mallory responded before anyone else could. We take every complaint seriously, he said, but we also have to be honest. Some complaints are filed by people trying to avoid responsibility for their own conduct. The retired judge frowned. That was not quite my question. Mallory nodded, as if he had answered it perfectly. Of course. Maya saw Daniel Price's hand tighten around the program. Helen looked for another question. Maya's hand was still raised. This time, people noticed. A man near the front turned halfway around. Someone whispered, "Here we go." Emily lifted her phone slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough. Helen could no longer pretend. "Miss William," she said. The name almost forced through her smile. Briefly, "Please." The assistant brought the microphone. Maya stood. She did not rush. She let the room settle under the knowledge that she was speaking again. "My question concerns internal review and the integrity of reports," she said. "If an officer's initial statement differs materially from the final version submitted to prosecutors, what process ensures the change was clarification rather than alteration?" Mallory's eyes locked on hers. Marcia Bell, the deputy prosecutor, leaned toward her microphone first. "That is an important question. In theory, revisions should be tracked, and any substantive change should be documented." "In theory," Maya repeated gently. Bell looked uncomfortable. "In practice, it depends on department policy and disclosure obligations." Maya turned slightly toward Mallory. "Captain, does your unit preserve prior drafts of incident reports?" Mallory's face went still. The question landed differently. It was not broad. It was not philosophical. It was a key fitted into a lock. "Our department follows all required retention policies," he said. "That was not my question. Does your unit preserve prior drafts?" Helen leaned forward. "Miss William, we cannot get into department-specific document handling." Mallory raised a hand, stopping Helen without looking at her. "I'll answer." Maya waited. "We preserve what the law requires us to preserve," Mallory said. "Who determines that?" "Our records division." "Under whose command structure?" Mallory's expression sharpened. "You are not entitled to an operational flowchart." Maya's voice remained calm. "If those drafts relate to possible changes in probable cause, use of force, or witness statements, then the public may be entitled to more than your assurance." The room had gone very still. Daniel Price looked up. For one moment, his eyes met Maya's. She saw fear there, but something else too. Recognition, not of who she was, but of what she had just touched. Mallory saw the glance. His head turned slightly toward Daniel, then back to Maya. "There is a reason amateurs should not wander into professional matters," Mallory said. "You hear a phrase like prior drafts and think you've uncovered some conspiracy. Reports are clarified all the time. Officers remember details. Supervisors ask for precision. That is not corruption. That is good paperwork," Maya said. "Good paperwork does not erase inconvenient facts." A whisper moved across the room. Mallory leaned toward his microphone. "You should be very careful, ma'am. You have said that to me several times today. Because you do not seem to learn." "No," Maya said. "Because you do not seem to answer." This time, the reaction was sharper. Someone inhaled audibly. A few faces turned toward Mallory, waiting. Dr. Keene folded his hands. Marcia Bell looked down at her notes, then back at Mallory with new attention. Helen rose. "We're moving on." Maya did not resist when the assistant reached for the microphone. She handed it back and sat down, but the room did not return to normal. That was the thing about truth. Once it entered, even quietly, it rearranged the furniture of people's minds. Mallory adjusted his cuffs. He smiled at the audience as if the exchange had amused him, but his eyes did not smile. They moved once more toward Daniel Price. Daniel looked down too late. Maya saw it. Emily saw it too. The panel dragged on for another 20 minutes. There were questions about recruitment, training, budgets, and community liaison programs. People tried to pull the conference back into safe territory. They spoke of listening sessions, youth mentorship, neighborhood walks, and improved communication. All worthy things. All easier to discuss than a changed report. When Helen finally announced the end of the session, the applause was thinner than before. Mallory stood immediately. Daniel Price stood too, but not fast enough. "Price," Mallory said. The word was not loud, yet it reached him like a hook. Daniel froze. Maya remained seated. Mallory walked toward the side exit, not looking back. Daniel followed after a moment. Folder clutched under one arm. Emily moved from the wall as if to follow, but Maya gave her the smallest shake of the head. "Not yet." Emily stopped. Maya rose slowly and moved toward the rear hallway, taking a route that would not look like pursuit. Near the service corridor, she paused beside a half-open door, marked staff only. Through the narrow gap, voices carried. Mallory's voice came first. "What the hell was that?" Daniel's answer was barely audible. "Sir, don't play dumb with me. She asked about drafts, and you looked like somebody stepped on your grave. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to." Mallory's voice dropped colder. "You think nobody notices fear? Fear talks louder than confession." There was silence. Then Daniel said, "Captain, I'm just here for the conference." "No. You're here because I allowed you to be here. You're on my unit because I allowed it. You still have a badge because I haven't decided otherwise." Maya's hand tightened around her notebook. Mallory continued, "You remember what I told you about that reporter?" "Yes, sir." "Then remember it better. You talked to Ross. You talked to that woman. You talked to anyone about internal files. And I will bury you so deep in administrative charges your daughter will graduate college before you see daylight." Daniel's voice shook. "Understood." "No," Mallory said. "Say it." Another pause. "I won't talk." "Good." Footsteps moved toward the door. Maya stepped away before it opened and turned toward the water table as if she had been passing by. Mallory emerged first. He saw her. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Suspicion. Then, contempt covered it. "Still wandering?" he asked. "Still observing," Maya said. He stared at her, then walked past. Daniel came out seconds later. His face had lost color. He almost passed Maya without looking, but she spoke softly. "Officer Price." He stopped. Not fully. Just enough. Maya did not move closer. There are rooms where telling the truth costs something, but there are also rooms where silence costs more. Daniel swallowed. "I don't know what you mean, ma'am." "Yes," Maya said gently. "You do." His eyes filled with something like shame. "I have a family." "I know." The answer startled him. Maya continued. "Courage does not mean forgetting what you have to lose. It means remembering what everyone else loses if you stay silent." Daniel looked toward the hallway where Mallory had gone. "I can't." Maya nodded. "Not yet." He looked back at her. She let the words rest between them. Not yet was not the same as never. Daniel walked away. Slower this time. Maya returned to the ballroom entrance. Emily stood waiting near the wall, eyes full of questions. Maya did not answer them. Not there, not with Mallory's allies scattered through the hall like listening devices, wearing suits. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Price threatened directly. Drafts likely exist. Fear attached to family." Then she closed the notebook and looked toward the stage. The day was not yet over, and Captain Mallory, in his arrogance, had just pointed straight to the place where the truth was buried. The next session should have been easier. That was how Helen Ward introduced it, though she did not use those words. She returned to the podium with her folder hugged against her ribs and a smile that had grown thinner with every hour. Behind her, the screen displayed the title, Community Trust, Listening Before Crisis. It was the kind of panel name designed to calm a room. No sharp edges, no direct accusations, no phrase that could frighten sponsors or make a city official regret attending. Listening Before Crisis sounded gentle, like something printed on a grant application or spoken at a church luncheon between coffee and lemon cake. But Maya knew that gentle titles could hide hard truths. Helen adjusted the microphone. For our final afternoon discussion before the closing session, we'll focus on communication, public trust, and the importance of building relationships before incidents occur. Captain Mallory sat at the end of the panel table this time, not the center. That had not pleased him. Maya saw it in the way he adjusted his chair twice, then set his water glass down a little too firmly. Dr. Keene had left for another commitment, and in his place sat a community liaison officer, a retired municipal judge, and a nonprofit director who worked with families affected by police violence. Her name was Lorraine Baptiste. She was in her 60s, with short silver hair, dark skin, and a voice that sounded like it had comforted many people and forgiven very few systems. She wore a simple black dress and a small cross around her neck. When Helen introduced her, the applause was polite, but cautious. Lorraine leaned toward the microphone. "Trust is not built with brochures," she said. "It is built when people tell you they are hurting, and you do not treat their pain like a public relations problem." The room stilled. Maya looked up from her notebook. Mallory looked down at his water glass. Lorraine continued, "I have sat with mothers who waited months for body camera footage. I have sat with fathers who filed complaints and never received a call back. I have sat with young men who were told they matched a description so many times they began to wonder if the description was simply their skin." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Helen's smile froze. The retired municipal judge, Judge Patterson, cleared his throat. "Miss Baptiste, I think what you're describing is exactly why communication matters." "With respect, Judge," Lorraine said, "communication without accountability is just a better way to say no." Maya wrote that down. Mallory finally leaned toward his microphone. "No one here is dismissing community concerns." Lorraine turned to him. "Then, answer them." The directness of it moved through the room like a hand striking a table. Mallory's smile returned, cold at the edges. "I have answered questions all day." "No," Lorraine said. "You have responded. That is not the same thing." A small sound came from somewhere near the back. Not laughter, surprise. Maya watched Mallory closely. His face remained composed, but his right hand closed into a fist beneath the table. He was a man used to managing angry citizens, nervous subordinates, ambitious reporters, and cautious politicians. But Lorraine Baptiste did not sound nervous. She sounded tired in the way people become tired after carrying other people's grief for years. Helen moved quickly. "Perhaps we can bring this back to best practices." Maya almost smiled. In rooms like this, best practices often meant, "Please stop naming the wound." The panel continued. Lorraine spoke about families who needed updates, not slogans. The community liaison officer talked about outreach events and youth basketball tournaments. Judge Patterson spoke of restoring respect for institutions. Mallory spoke of criminals taking advantage of public hesitation. Each answer revealed its speaker more than the subject. Then Helen opened the floor for final questions. Maya raised her hand. This time, the room reacted before Helen could. Heads turned. A man in the front row sighed loudly. Someone whispered, "Again?" But there were other faces too. Faces watching with new attention, as if the day had trained them to understand that Maya's questions did not wander. They walked straight toward locked doors. Helen hesitated. Lorraine Baptiste looked toward Maya and said, "I would like to hear her question." That left Helen no graceful escape. "Yes, Miss William," she said. "One question." The assistant brought the microphone. Maya stood. "My question is for Captain Mallory," she said. "If trust requires listening, why has your unit failed to provide timely responses to civilian complaints involving use of force, including 11 complaints that appear to remain unresolved?" Mallory's eyes narrowed. "Appear, ma'am. That is the key word. Then correct the record. The record is not yours to command." "No," Maya said, "but it is yours to explain." A murmur rolled through the room. Mallory leaned back, looking almost amused. "I will not discuss pending personnel matters in a public conference because an audience member wants attention." Lorraine spoke before Maya could. "Families are not personnel matters." Mallory turned toward her. "And I did not say they were. You implied their pain was an inconvenience." "I implied nothing." Maya kept the microphone steady. "Captain, are the complaints pending, closed, or unresolved. Mallory's patience cracked. I am not going to let you conduct a cross-examination from the aisle. It is a simple question. It is a loaded question. It is a public question. It is an ignorant question. Mallory snapped. The room fell quiet. There it was. The third interruption had turned into something heavier. Not merely dismissal, but open contempt. Maya did not move. Helen stepped in. Captain. Mallory raised his hand again, cutting even Helen off. No. Enough. I have tolerated this all day. This woman has interrupted sessions, insulted police officers, questioned department procedures she does not understand, and now she wants to pretend she is entitled to confidential information. Maya looked at him. You still have not answered. Mallory gave a short laugh. Because you are not owed an answer. The sentence landed with a force even he seemed not to measure. Maya let it sit. Across the room, Emily Ross lifted her phone higher. Daniel Price looked up. Lorraine Baptiste closed her eyes for 1 second, as if she were saying a prayer for patience. Maya spoke softly. That is the clearest thing you have said today. Mallory stared at her. She continued. You have spent this conference speaking about trust, accountability, safety, and order. But when asked whether citizens' complaints have been reviewed, your answer is that the public is not owed an answer. Mallory leaned toward the microphone, his voice low and hard. Do not put words in my mouth. I am repeating yours. No, he said. You are twisting them. Then clarify them. He did not. For the first time that day, silence did not protect him. It exposed him. Helen moved toward the center of the stage, desperation sharpening her voice. We're going to move on now. Thank you, Miss William. Maya did not immediately sit. She looked at Mallory, then at Helen, then at the room. If this conference is about listening before crisis, she said, then I hope someone here understands that crisis begins the moment people in power decide they no longer have to listen. She handed the microphone back. This time, there was no laughter. She sat down slowly. Mallory's face had darkened. Helen announced a short break, even though the panel had not officially ended. People rose in uneven clusters. Some moved quickly toward the exits. Others lingered, pretending to check their phones while processing what they had heard. Maya remained seated for a moment, writing in her notebook. Third public refusal. State's public not owed answer. Escalating hostility. When she closed the notebook, Lorraine Baptiste stood beside her. You keep good notes, Lorraine said. Maya looked up. I try. Lorraine studied her face. You are not just a concerned citizen. No. A lawyer? Sometimes. Lorraine smiled faintly. That is the strangest answer I've heard today. And I've been listening to police officials since breakfast. Maya smiled too, but only a little. Lorraine's expression grew serious. Be careful. Men like him do not fear being wrong. They fear being seen. I know. No, Lorraine said gently. You may know the law, but women like me know the pattern. First they laugh, then they warn, then they punish. Maya absorbed the words. Before she could answer, Mallory's voice cut through the room from the front. Helen Ward froze near the stage. Mallory stood with 2 officers beside him, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Maya. He spoke quietly, but not quietly enough. I want her kept away from the microphone for the rest of the conference. Helen glanced toward Maya, then toward the remaining attendees. Captain, this is not a request, Mallory said. She is disrupting a professional event. Lorraine's face hardened. Emily Ross, standing near the wall, angled her phone toward them. Daniel Price stood halfway between the stage and the side exit, as if his body had not yet decided which conscience to obey. Helen lowered her voice. We can handle it discreetly. Maya heard every word. So did enough of the room. Mallory turned away, satisfied that his will had become someone else's responsibility. Lorraine leaned down slightly toward Maya. There, she said. That is the punish part. Maya stood, calm as ever, though her eyes had changed. There was no anger visible in them, only decision. She opened her notebook one last time and wrote, after third question, attempts to restrict access to microphone. Then she looked toward Helen Ward, who was now walking toward her with the expression of a woman carrying an order she wished belonged to someone else. The anonymous test was no longer simply about how Mallory treated Maya. It was about how many people would help him do it. Helen Ward walked toward Maya with the slow, careful expression of a woman who had spent her career preventing public embarrassment and had just realized embarrassment was no longer preventable. The ballroom was still half full. People lingered near the aisles, pretending to discuss the panel while watching what would happen next. Lawyers were good at pretending not to stare. Judges were better. Police officers did not bother pretending. They stood in small clusters near the front, arms folded or hands resting near their belts, their attention fixed on Maya as if she had become a disturbance instead of a woman with a question. Lorraine Baptiste remained beside Maya, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. Emily Ross stood near the wall, phone held low but recording. Daniel Price had not moved. He stood near the side exit, trapped between Mallory's order and the truth pressing against his ribs. Helen stopped in front of Maya. "Miss William," she said softly, "may we speak in the hallway?" Maya looked at her. "Is this a request or an instruction?" Helen's smile flickered. "A request. Then we can speak here." A few heads turned more openly. Helen lowered her voice further. "Please, I'm trying to keep this from becoming a scene." Lorraine gave a quiet laugh without humor. It became a scene when he decided a black woman's question needed security. Helen's face tightened. "Miss Baptiste, with respect, this is a conference management issue." "No," Lorraine said. "It is always called management when someone wants injustice handled quietly." Maya lifted one hand gently, not to silence Lorraine, but to calm the moment before Helen used it as evidence. "I'll speak with you in the hallway," Maya said. Lorraine looked at her. Maya gave a small nod. Emily shifted as if to follow. Maya's eyes moved briefly toward the phone in Emily's hand, then back to Helen. Emily understood and stayed close enough to see through the open door. Helen led Maya into the corridor just outside the ballroom. The sounds of the conference softened behind them, replaced by the clink of cups from the refreshment station and the low hum of hotel air conditioning. On the wall, a framed photograph showed a past conference. Smiling officials, a police chief holding a plaque, a banner declaring, "Justice through partnership." Maya noticed the word partnership. It seemed to appear often in places where accountability was unwelcome. Helen turned to face her. "I need you to understand the position you're putting us in." Maya said nothing. "We have senior officials in that room. Judges, prosecutors, law enforcement, leadership, sponsors, people who came here expecting a productive professional environment. And my questions prevented productivity? They created tension. Tension is not the opposite of professionalism. No, but disruption is." Maya looked at Helen for a long moment. "When Captain Mallory interrupted me repeatedly, called my questions ignorant, suggested I did not belong here, and demanded I be kept away from the microphone. Did you consider that disruption?" Helen's mouth opened, then closed. "That is different." "How?" "He is a scheduled speaker, and I am a registered attendee." Helen glanced away. Maya knew that look. She had seen it in school administrators who wanted complaints to disappear before board meetings, in city attorneys who preferred settlements without admissions, in courtroom clerks who whispered that a judge was old-fashioned when they meant biased. The look did not say, "I disagree." It said, "I know, but I am afraid of the cost of saying so." Helen hugged her folder tighter. "Miss William, I'm asking you to refrain from asking further questions during today's remaining sessions. If you have concerns, you may submit them in writing to the conference office." Maya's voice stayed even. "So the answer is yes." Helen frowned. "Yes to what?" "You are restricting my access to the microphone because Captain Mallory objected to being questioned. That is not how I would characterize it. But it is what is happening." Helen drew a breath. "This conference has procedures. Procedures should protect fairness, not disguise surrender." The words struck harder than Maya intended, or perhaps exactly as hard as they needed to. Helen looked down at the carpet. For the first time, her polished surface cracked enough for exhaustion to show. "You don't understand what it takes to hold an event like this together," Helen said quietly. "One wrong moment, one viral clip, one offended sponsor, and years of work can collapse. Maya softened, but only slightly. I understand more than you think. But if an event about justice collapses because someone asks about civil rights complaints, then maybe it was not being held together by integrity. Maybe it was being held together by silence. Helen's eyes lifted. Behind Maya, the ballroom door opened. Captain Mallory stepped into the hallway. He did not come alone. 2 officers followed him. One older, one younger, both wearing the careful blankness of men who had decided their faces would not testify. Mallory adjusted one cuff as he approached, his expression composed now, almost pleasant. That was the most dangerous version of him. Not angry, but certain. "Helen," he said, "is everything under control?" The question was not a question. Helen straightened. "We're handling it, Captain." Mallory looked at Maya. Still trying to turn this into a civil rights crusade? Maya held his gaze. Still avoiding the words internal review? One of the officers behind Mallory shifted his weight. Mallory smiled. "You see, this is exactly what I mean. She cannot help herself." Helen said quickly, "Captain, please. I'm speaking with Miss William." "No. You're negotiating with a disruption." Mallory turned his body slightly, making sure the officers behind him remained visible. "This woman has been warned several times. She has interrupted panels, made reckless implications, and harassed speakers." Maya's eyebrow lifted. "Harassed? You approached me during the break. I offered a handshake. You inserted yourself into my space. You refused the handshake and threatened me." Mallory laughed once. "There it is. The victim performance." The hallway seemed to narrow. Maya could hear movement behind the ballroom doors. She knew people inside were listening. She also knew Mallory knew it. That was why he chose his words carefully now, coding contempt in official language. Helen whispered, "Captain, this isn't helpful." Mallory ignored her. "Miss William, whoever you are, whatever group you came in with, this is your last warning. You will sit quietly through the closing session, or you will be removed." Maya looked at the 2 officers behind him. "Removed by whom?" Mallory's smile thinned. "Do you really want to test that?" The older officer's eyes flicked away. The younger one swallowed. Maya did not move. In her mind, she saw her father again, hands on the hood of the old Buick, standing still because stillness was sometimes the only shield a black person was allowed. But she was not 9 years old now. She was not in the back seat. She was not holding a melting milkshake and a spelling certificate. She was a woman who had read the law until she could hear when it was being twisted. She was a judge, whether this hallway knew it or not, and still, she did not say it. Not yet. Helen stepped between them slightly. "No one is removing anyone. Miss William has agreed to speak with me." "I agreed to speak," Maya said. "I did not agree to surrender my right to ask lawful questions in a public conference." Mallory turned toward Helen. "Then, revoke her credentials." Helen went pale. "Captain, do it." "I don't think that's necessary." His voice dropped. "You want this conference remembered for chaos?" Helen's hand tightened around the folder. Maya watched the conflict move across her face. Fear, calculation, shame, fear again. From inside, the ballroom came a small sound, a chair scraping back, then another. Someone had moved closer to the door. Emily Ross appeared in the doorway, phone now clearly visible at her side. "Is there a reason a registered attendee is being threatened with removal?" Emily asked. Mallory's eyes snapped toward her. "This doesn't concern the press." Emily smiled thinly. "That usually means it does." Helen looked as though she might faint. Mallory took one step toward Emily. "Turn that off." Emily did not. Maya spoke before the moment could break open. "Captain Mallory, if you believe I violated conference policy, state the policy. If you believe I violated the law, state the law. If neither is true, then what you are doing is intimidation." The word stayed in the hallway. Intimidation. The 2 officers behind Mallory heard it. Helen heard it. Emily's phone heard it. And through the partially open ballroom doors, enough of the room heard it too. Mallory's face hardened, but he did not answer. A voice came from behind Emily. "Is there a problem here?" Judge Harold Whitman stepped into view, cane in hand, slower than everyone else but somehow carrying more authority than all of them combined. His eyes moved from Mallory to Helen, to the officers, and finally to Maya. Mallory straightened. Judge Whitman. No problem. Just handling a disruption. Whitman looked at Maya. Are you disrupting? No, Judge, Maya said. I asked questions. Whitman turned back to Mallory. Questions are inconvenient things. That does not make them misconduct. Mallory's smile struggled to return. With respect, Judge, there are operational matters she does not understand. Whitman's voice remained mild. Then explain them. Mallory said nothing. The old judge let the silence stretch. It was a courtroom silence, patient and merciless. Helen cleared her throat. Perhaps we should all return inside. The closing session preparations are beginning soon. Whitman nodded. A wise suggestion. Mallory looked at Maya one last time. This isn't over. Maya's voice was quiet. You keep saying that, as if I disagree. He turned and walked back into the ballroom, the two officers following. Helen hurried after them, clutching her folder like a life vest. Emily lowered her phone slightly. I got enough. Maya looked at her. Enough for what? Emily glanced toward the ballroom. For people to know. He tried. Maya opened her notebook and wrote one line. Attempts credential removal after lawful questions. Witnessed by press and federal judge. Whitman stood beside her, watching her write. Maya, he said softly. The announcement is soon. I know. You have given them more than enough rope. Maya closed the notebook. Rope only matters if someone sees what they tied with it. From inside the ballroom, the host's voice came through the speakers, too cheerful for the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, please begin making your way back to your seats. Our closing session will begin shortly. Maya looked through the open doors. Mallory had returned to the front, his face calm again, pretending the hallway had not happened. Helen moved near the stage, whispering urgently to a staffer. Daniel Price stood alone near the side aisle, staring at Maya with something close to dread and something closer to hope. Whitman offered his arm. This time, Maya did not take it. She stepped forward on her own. The room had tested itself. Now it was time for it to hear the result. Maya entered the ballroom without Judge Whitman's arm, but she knew he was behind her. That knowledge steadied her more than support at her elbow ever could have. Some people needed to be led into a room. Maya only needed to know that someone honest had witnessed the hallway before she stepped back into it. The Jefferson ballroom was nearly full again. The closing session had drawn everyone back from coffee tables, phone calls, and whispered conversations in the corridor. People had returned to their assigned seats with the peculiar stiffness of adults pretending nothing unusual had happened. On the stage, two staffers adjusted the height of the podium microphone. A large screen behind it displayed the conference seal and the words, Closing Remarks. The American flag stood to the left of the stage, unmoving beneath the lights. Captain Richard Mallory sat at the front table, his back straight, his hands folded in front of him. To anyone who had not seen the hallway, he looked composed. To Maya, he looked like a man holding a door shut with both shoulders while pretending the room behind it was empty. Helen Ward moved briskly near the steps to the stage, speaking to a young technician through a tight smile. Her folder was open now, pages shifting in her hands. Once, she looked toward Judge Whitman. Then, she looked toward Maya. Then she looked away so quickly that shame seemed to pull her chin down. Maya took her seat near the middle of the room. Emily Ross remained near the wall, phone in one hand, press badge resting against her blazer. She had stopped pretending to be casual. Her eyes moved constantly. Mallory, Helen, Daniel Price, Maya, the stage. She knew the closing session mattered, though she did not yet know how much. Daniel stood near the side aisle, no longer seated. His folder was tucked under one arm, but his hand kept tightening and loosening on the edge of it. He looked toward Mallory, then toward Maya, then down at the floor. Maya saw fear in him, but fear had changed shape. Earlier it had bent him downward. Now it held him upright, trembling, but upright. That difference mattered. The host stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience, he said, his cheerful voice floating over the room as though it could smooth every sharp corner. We are preparing for our formal closing session. Before we begin, we ask that all attendees take their seats and silence their phones. A few people laughed softly while reaching into pockets and handbags. Chairs shifted. Glasses clinked. Someone in the back coughed. Mallory turned in his seat and looked directly at Maya. The look was brief, but clear. "Sit still." Maya did not react. The host continued. "We have had a full and thoughtful day of discussion. Public safety, constitutional principles, community relationships, accountability, and the responsibility of leadership have all been central themes." Maya almost looked at Helen. Responsibility of leadership. It was strange how often people announced virtues in the very rooms where they failed to practice them. As the host stepped away, Helen approached Judge Whitman near the stage. Maya could not hear their first words, but she could read Helen's posture. She was trying to speak quietly and urgently, the way people do when they hope procedure can outrun truth. Whitman listened. He did not interrupt. He stood with both hands resting on the top of his cane, his face calm and deeply tired. Then he said something. Helen's shoulders dropped. She nodded. From the front table, Mallory watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. For the first time all day, uncertainty crossed his face and stayed long enough for Maya to see it. A woman seated behind Maya leaned forward and whispered to her companion, "Do you know what's going on?" "No idea," the companion whispered back. "But it feels serious." Maya kept her eyes on the stage. Judge Whitman climbed the steps slowly. The room quieted, not because he demanded it, but because age and office still held a kind of gravity in that ballroom. Even those who did not know the details knew Harold Whitman's name. He had been on the federal bench for decades. He had presided over corruption cases, civil rights disputes, voting rights challenges, police misconduct suits, and trials that had made young attorneys grow old before verdict. He reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. "Good afternoon," he said. The room answered with scattered greetings. Whitman smiled faintly. "At my age, any room that answers back is a blessing." A warmer laugh moved through the audience. The old judge waited for it to settle. "I was asked to offer closing remarks today," he said, "and I intend to do that. But before I speak about the future of justice, I want to speak briefly about the habits of rooms." Maya lowered her gaze to the notebook on her lap. Mallory shifted in his chair. Whitman continued. "Every room has habits. Some rooms welcome questions. Some rooms tolerate them. Some rooms punish them politely and call it order." The ballroom went still. Helen stood at the side of the stage, her face pale. Whitman did not look at Mallory. He did not need to. "I have spent most of my life in courtrooms," he said, "and I have learned that justice is not threatened by questions. It is threatened by people who believe their authority places them beyond questions." A few attendees looked down. Others looked toward Mallory before catching themselves. Maya saw Emily's phone rise slightly. Whitman turned a page on the podium, though Maya suspected he was not reading from it. "This conference was built around a promise," he said. "Public safety, constitutional rights, and the future of justice. Those are not decorative words. They require more than applause. They require patience when the question is uncomfortable. They require humility when the person asking it does not look like the person you expected to respect." Mallory's jaw tightened. Then he stood. It was not dramatic at first. He simply pushed his chair back and rose, buttoning his uniform jacket with one sharp motion. But the sound of the chair legs against the carpet was enough. People turned. "Judge Whitman," Mallory said, his voice controlled. "With respect, I hope we are not going to reward disruption." Helen's eyes widened. Whitman looked at him over the top of his glasses. "Captain Mallory, I have not yielded the floor." A low ripple moved through the ballroom. Mallory's face hardened, but he forced a smile. "Of course. I only mean that. Today has included repeated interruptions from an attendee whose credentials remain unclear." Maya did not move. Whitman's voice stayed mild. "Credentials are an interesting concern, Captain," Mallory said. "They matter in professional spaces." "Yes," Whitman said. "They often do. Though I have found that some people use credentials to determine whether a person deserves courtesy. That is a dangerous habit." Mallory looked toward Maya. "Courtesy goes both ways." "Indeed," Whitman said. "Please sit down." The sentence was quiet, but it carried the weight of a gavel. For a heartbeat, Mallory did not obey. Then, He sat. The room breathed again. Whitman looked out over the audience. There will be time for formal introductions in a moment. But before that, let me say this plainly. The measure of our commitment to the Constitution is not how respectfully we quote it when nobody is challenging us. It is how faithfully we honor it when someone inconvenient asks whether we are living up to it. Maya felt the words settle over the room. They did not vindicate her yet. They prepared the ground. At the side aisle, Daniel Price had gone very still. His eyes were fixed on Mallory, but his face no longer looked empty with fear. It looked like a man reaching the edge of a decision. Whitman looked down briefly, then back at the crowd. Now, he said, as we enter our closing session, it is my privilege to introduce someone whose life's work has been shaped by that very question. Helen Ward pressed one hand to her folder. Mallory frowned. The technician at the back of the room placed a finger against his headset. The screen behind Judge Whitman flickered once, still showing the conference seal. Maya's hand rested lightly on her notebook. The room waited, and for the first time all day, Captain Richard Mallory did not know what was coming next. The standing silence did not last long. Rooms like the Jefferson Ballroom were not built for truth to linger too comfortably. They were built for transitions, agendas, closing remarks, polite applause, and valet tickets tucked into suit pockets. Within minutes, people began to move. Some approached Maya with careful faces, offering words that sounded like apologies without quite becoming them. Others left quickly, eyes lowered, phones already in hand. A few officers gathered around Captain Richard Mallory, but even they stood at a slight distance now, as if whatever had touched him might spread. Mallory did not speak to Maya again that day. He left through a side exit with 2 officers beside him, and his shoulders squared too hard. Emily Ross filmed him walking out. Daniel Price watched him go, then turned toward Maya with a look that held both terror and release. Maya did not call him forward. She did not turn the moment into spectacle. She simply walked to him after the room had thinned. "Officer Price," she said quietly, "you need counsel." Daniel nodded. His eyes were red, though he had not cried. "Am I finished?" Maya looked at him for a moment. "That depends on what you do next." He swallowed. "I'm scared. I know. I have a wife. A little girl. My father's treatments." His voice broke slightly, and he stopped. Maya's face softened. Courage does not mean you stop being afraid. It means fear does not get the final vote. Daniel looked down at the folder in his hands. "Preserve everything," she said. "Do not sort it. Do not explain it to friends. Do not call Mallory. Do not warn anyone. Get an attorney, and when the proper request comes, tell the truth exactly as you know it. No more, no less." He nodded again, this time with purpose. Emily approached a few minutes later, phone tucked away, reporter's urgency still burning behind her eyes. "Judge William," she said, "may I ask what happens now?" Maya closed her notebook. "Now the story becomes a process." That doesn't sound as satisfying as a headline. "It rarely is," Maya said, "but it lasts longer." By 6:40 that evening, formal referrals had begun. Judge Whitman contacted a senior official he trusted at the Federal Inspector General's office. Maya did not use her new title as a weapon. She used it as a doorway. She documented what had happened at the conference, identified witnesses, noted the statements made publicly, and recommended preservation of materials. Helen Ward, pale and shaken, directed conference staff to secure recordings, microphone logs, registration files, and hallway security footage. For once, the machinery of an institution began moving before the evidence disappeared. Mallory was placed on administrative leave 2 days later. The statement from his department was cautious, bloodless, and familiar. Pending review, full cooperation, commitment to transparency, no further comment. But the public had already seen enough. Emily Ross's article appeared the next morning with a headline that spread quickly across legal circles, community pages, police accountability forums, and cable news segments. Police captain tried to silence black woman at legal conference. She was the new federal judge. The video did what written complaints had failed to do for years. It made people watch. They watched Mallory interrupt Maya. They watched him question whether she belonged. They watched him say the public was not owed an answer. They watched Judge Whitman introduce her. They watched the room change its face when her title appeared on the screen. But the part that traveled furthest was not the reveal. It was Maya's sentence. You did not disrespect me because I was a judge. You disrespected me because you thought I was not one. People repeated it on morning shows, in church basements, in law school classrooms, in barbershops, in kitchens where older parents showed the clip to grown children and said, "See, that's what I've been telling you." Then the families came forward. Carla Jennings came first. She brought the complaint she had filed after her son Marcus's wrist was broken outside a convenience store. Then Althea Monroe brought letters she had sent every month asking for body camera footage from her nephew's arrest. Jerome Ellis brought medical records. Keisha Grant brought emails. Others came with names, dates, photographs, call logs, unanswered certified letters, and the weary dignity of people who had been told for too long that patience was the same as justice. Daniel Price retained counsel and gave a protected statement. The files existed. The drafts existed. The changes existed. Could not identify probable cause had become subject displayed evasive behavior. Forced to the ground had become guided to the ground. A witness who contradicted the official account had disappeared from a packet before it reached prosecutors. A body camera request had been marked pending long after the internal review had already closed. Mallory resigned before the investigation concluded. For one afternoon, commentators argued whether the resignation should end the matter. Maya heard that argument from her chambers weeks later while reviewing motions unrelated to the conference. She turned off the television before the segment finished. A resignation was not accountability. It was sometimes only a man choosing the door that looked least like judgment. 6 months later, the Department of Justice released its preliminary findings. The report did not rely on outrage. It did not need adjectives. It used dates, tables, ratios, retained drafts, complaint numbers, disciplinary gaps, and sworn statements. It found a pattern of unlawful stops concentrated in predominantly black neighborhoods. It found delays in body camera release that disproportionately affected complaints against Mallory's unit. It found that internal review practices lacked independence. It found evidence that officers who raised concerns had been threatened, reassigned, or isolated. It found that altered report language had, in multiple cases, made questionable stops appear legally justified. The city signed a reform agreement before winter. A civilian review board was created with subpoena power. Traffic stop data had to be published quarterly by race, location, and outcome. Body camera footage in serious force cases had to be reviewed and released under fixed timelines. Officers who reported misconduct received formal protections. 5 years of complaints were ordered into an independent audit. Training on constitutional policing became mandatory, not decorative. None of it restored every injury. Maya knew that. A mother whose son had been beaten did not get back the night before the beating. A man wrongly arrested did not get back the job he lost while waiting for charges to be dropped. A young officer who told the truth did not get back the months he had spent afraid in his own uniform. Justice, when it finally arrived, often came carrying tools instead of miracles. Still, tools mattered. 1 year later, Maya William returned to the same hotel in Arlington. The Jefferson ballroom looked almost unchanged. Same chandeliers, same patterned carpet, same flags beside the stage, but the room felt different. The front rows were filled not only with judges and prosecutors, but with law students, public defenders, community advocates, retired officers, clergy, and families who had learned the hard way that institutions rarely listened unless someone made listening unavoidable. Maya stood at the podium, older in ways a calendar could not measure. She had spent the year on the federal bench, doing what she had always done, reading carefully, listening closely, refusing to let power hurry her past the facts. She had not given many interviews. She had not built a public brand around the conference. She had gone back to work, because work was where justice either became real or remained a speech. After her remarks, a young black woman rose near the back of the room. She looked no more than 22. Her suit was slightly too large in the shoulders. Her hands trembled around the microphone. Judge William, she said, what do we do when people in power keep interrupting us? Maya looked at her, and for a moment, the year folded in on itself. She saw the old Navy suit, the notebook, the hand Mallory had refused, the laughter that had followed her down the aisle. She saw her father's hands on the hood of a car. She saw her mother's handwriting on the first page of the notebook. Then she answered. You keep speaking, Maya said, not because they are ready to hear you, but because the truth is still true before the room respects it. Sometimes being interrupted does not mean you are wrong. Sometimes it means the truth has entered a room that is not ready to make space for it. The young woman nodded, tears bright in her eyes. After the session ended, she came to the front slowly. Maya stepped down from the stage. The young woman extended her hand. For the briefest instant, Maya remembered Mallory's hands disappearing into his pockets. She remembered the refusal, the insult, the attempt to make her feel small in a room that had mistaken cruelty for order. Then Maya took the young woman's hand in both of hers. I'm glad you asked, she said. The young woman smiled through her tears. Around them, the ballroom continued to empty. People gathered coats, folded programs, checked phones, and spoke in low voices. Outside, evening settled over Arlington, and across the river, Washington's lights began to glow against the dark. Maya looked once toward the stage, then down at the notebook tucked beneath her arm. Justice had not arrived on time. It rarely did, but when it came, it had remembered every voice someone tried to bury. The lesson of this story is that true character is revealed in how people treat someone they believe has no power. Captain Mallory did not change because Maya became a federal judge. He was exposed because Maya's quiet dignity allowed the room to see who he had been all along. The story reminds us that justice is not protected by titles, uniforms, or applause, but by courage, accountability, and the willingness to listen when uncomfortable questions are asked. Sometimes the truth enters a room softly, through one calm voice, one steady question, and one person brave enough not to sit down when power tells them to be silent. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts on the storytelling, the emotional pacing, or whatever stayed with you after listening. Every comment you share helps make the next stories more honest, moving, and meaningful. And if you have a powerful or meaningful story of your own, please do not hesitate to send it to the channel. It may become the next story to touch and inspire thousands of others. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.